Welcome to this first event in the Inspiring Women in Construction and Engineering programme, which is jointly hosted by New Civil Engineer and Construction News. I'm Claire Smith and I'm editor at New Civil Engineer, and I'm going to be chairing the main part of today's webinar on mentoring. This is the first in a series of events that will run through this year with a focus on mentoring and industry support before culminating with an award ceremony. More on that later. And the whole programme builds on Construction News' Inspiring Women campaign, which was first launched 4 years ago, and NCE's Recognising Women in Engineering Awards. Before we get started, I'd like to thank Curtins and Wilmot Dixon for their support of this initiative, and also to draw your attention to the survey we have launched alongside this webinar to understand the challenges and issues people face in driving forward their careers in this sector, and to understand your objectives when it comes to delivering change. I'm going to be joined in a moment by my counterpart on Construction News, Len Bingley, to explore what he's learned over the course of the last 4 years with Inspiring Women. And then later we're going to be discussing the role of mentoring in developing and driving women's careers in construction engineering, and consider what good mentorship looks like with a panel of experts in the subject. And you'll be able to put your own questions to them towards the end of this session. But first, let's set the scene and talk about Inspiring Women. So welcome, Len. What was it that drove the Construction News team to launch the original programme?
Good morning, Claire. I think the initial impetus was the recognition, really, there's just a lack of women at every level in construction. Doesn't matter where you look, whether it's on-site roles or leadership. Women are just dramatically underrepresented. And Construction News really wanted to do something about that. And I think that the issue that was first seized on 4 years ago was that lack of female leadership. And what we tried to do was create a series of events and activities to do two things, really: to provide networking opportunities for women to help each other to break through glass ceilings, and also to provide some inspirational speakers, again, to create those sorts of role models that might be needed. Over the past couple of years, we've really expanded what we're trying to achieve, not just to look at those sort of leadership issues, but to look at women at every level throughout their career to try and create those same opportunities for networking and inspiration for women to make progress. But much more importantly, we're also looking at employers and trying to say what do employers need to do to be better at attracting, retaining, recognizing the talents of the women in their workforce. Because it's kind of crazy to say, well, there's a lack of women and therefore women need to do something to solve that. That's completely backwards. It's the problem lies with the industry, and it's the industry that's got to change.
So were there common themes that came out of the conversation at the first events, and how have those themes evolved or changed over the course of the initiative?
Well, I think, as I mentioned, one of the things we were trying to correct in the early days was the lack of role models. That, you know, it's just really rare sometimes to see women on site, and it was interesting when we first started hosting these meetings. Some of the feedback we got was about women saying how wonderful it was to be in a room where there were so many other women, rather than being the minority in a meeting. I think in terms of the challenges, I mean, some of them are just really obvious. Construction is still racked with sexism, whether it's overt or unconscious. There's still issues of perhaps people just tending to want to hire people in their own image. You know, we need somebody on this job who's just like me. That sort of attitude. And to overcome that, it takes, from the employer perspective, it takes process. If people have got unconscious bias, you need a process to counter that. And whether that's training to make people more aware of it, or whether it's as the way that you hire people or the way that you select people, you need something in place to make sure that women get the consideration they deserve at every level.
Yeah, when I first graduated 25 years ago, there were very few female engineers working in the firm I joined, and most of the women who were there were secretaries. I've seen quite a big change since then, but is the shift accelerating? Because I feel like it's talked about more, but is it actually making a tangible difference for women who are in the industry? From chairing the Inspiring Women events, Lem, what do you see as the main challenges the industry still faces when it comes to encouraging more women into the industry and trying to reach that gender balance?
Well, I think it's a matter of trying to make sure that the employer actually recognises that there's a problem recognizes that there are things that can be done to correct that problem. So whether that is at the hiring stage, whether it's when you're putting a team together that you have processes in place that help you to correct those imbalances that there are there. So I don't think there's any simple solutions, however. So it's a long-term effort. As you say, 25 years ago, you saw an imbalance. The imbalance is still there. It's going to be a long-term effort.
So the events are only part of Inspiring Women, though. Can you tell us how you worked with employers to get them to step up and drive change with the pledge, which NCE is now promoting to the civil engineering industry?
Sure. We launched the Inspiring Women pledge in June last year. We started that effort with a meeting with a group of women in different roles in the industry, talking about what they think might help, what kind of statements might help. We also worked with some employers, notably Wilmot Dixon, one of the sponsors of Inspiring Women when it was just a CN initiative. And we decided to come up with something which was, it's not about tick boxes. It's not a list of things that you can check off. It's about attitudes. And those attitudes cover activities in HR, in training, in recruitment, and tackling the gender pay gap and things like that. And we tried to come up with a form of words that would be relevant wherever you are in your journey, from just starting out. If you're an employer that's not really tackled this, where do you start? If you're quite sophisticated, what are the things that you can make sure that you keep doing, or you can perhaps accelerate your efforts? So we were trying to cover a number of bases. We launched that last summer with 15 founding signatories. I think we're now up to about 40. And they come from all parts of the industry: suppliers, contractors, subcontractors, consultants, engineers, you name it. It's great to be working now with NCE to try and expand the number of firms that are going to get involved with that. So I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah, it's really interesting to see the National Infrastructure Commission are coming on board with that as well. So I'm really delighted that NCE is now working with Construction News on the Inspiring Women programme and the pledge to drive forward broader industry awareness. Our spotlight on mentoring this year sharpens the focus on the individuals and ensuring those who want support can get it and get the right support too. So now I think it'd be a really good time to introduce our panel, who are going to be kickstarting our attention on mentorship and exploring the benefits for everyone involved. So joining us today, we have Incendium Consulting Associate Director Ewelina Kruk, Steer Support and Mentoring Director Josie Rothera, and Built by Us founder Danna Walker. Thank you all for joining us today. Our panel of experts will be taking questions from the audience later on in the webinar, but don't feel you have to wait until that part to start. You can use the Q&A option on screen to put your questions to our panel as they occur to you, or vote on questions you'd like to see answered, and Len will be putting those to our panel later on. So I think a really good place to start would be for each of you to briefly share with us what mentoring means to you and how your career has benefited both as a mentee and mentor. Ewelina, could you start us off, please?
Yeah, absolutely. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for having me. Mentoring throughout my career, and I began working as a project manager assistant on construction sites. I'm into more leadership roles now. But the very beginnings, especially when I was learning a very technically dominated craft, where the support that came from mentoring was immense, for someone to walk me through even things that happen in meetings and just explain to me what was actually being discussed, because you could walk in and be a bit overwhelmed. It was also an opportunity to bounce ideas off of someone, and to maybe sense check. We know we all have those imposter syndromes at times, and we're thinking to ourselves, I've got this genius idea, but I'm actually really scared to put it on the agenda for the meeting. But if you can talk and discuss it with somebody else as your sounding board, then there's an opportunity to embrace your idea and you get the empowerment from it. So it's definitely empowerment, it's guidance, it's the assistance with understanding the things that we know that we don't yet fully understand. And then as a mentor, for me, it's an immense pleasure. I can't even explain to you how rewarding it is to know that your words, your support has enabled someone to flourish. That is the biggest reward you can get. So that's what mentoring is to me.
Great, thank you. Josie, can you share with us your experience now?
Yeah, absolutely. Sort of similar to Ewelina, my first role was as I was on site. I was working for a main contractor, so I wasn't really, there weren't loads of other women on site. And what happened was when I first graduated, I had a line manager who, by very nature of the support that he gave me, and the confidence he gave me, sort of fell into that mentor role. I don't think we ever specifically said this is a mentoring relationship, but he was that person that I went to time and time again, even once that project had finished and we had moved to different companies, because of the support that he had given me and because of the trust that I had in him and how much I valued his sort of opinions going forward as well. And that for me was incredibly important, being the only female on the construction sites, just because I didn't have anyone else that I could necessarily talk to about certain things. What I do now is that we run steer support and mentoring, and what we do is provide that mentoring for undergraduate students. And it's a really important activity that you can do as they're transitioning from their final year in the built environment undergraduate program into our industry, because our industry is pretty daunting when you're coming out of it. And being able to give someone a mentor in their final year, it's hugely beneficial to them. It helps them understand what sort of opportunities there are in the environment as well. And it really helps them find that person that they can trust and speak to sort of at an early stage in their career, which is really, really going to help them going forward.
Yeah, that's really interesting about the transition side of things. Danna, how has your career shaped your passion for mentorship?
That's a great question. Thank you so much for having me this morning. I actually started in construction as an apprentice electrician many, many years ago. I went from an all-girls school into an all-male environment, which was a bit of a shock to the system, both for them and for me. But one of the key words that kind of jumped into my head as you asked that question in terms of being a mentee is allyship. So I was really fortunate that I had someone who was an electrician, but also a gas fitter, so incredibly well respected amongst the other electricians, called Smithy. And he kind of took me under his wing, and he'd sit there and make me do formulas and calculations and things like that. Apologies if you can hear an engine in the background. But because he was so well respected, the fact that he was kind of taking me under his wing, giving me support, made a huge difference to how I was seen by everybody, because it is so tough to be in that situation where you're the only woman of colour in such a different kind of place of work, and a place where perhaps some people feel that you don't belong. So it's incredibly powerful to have that allyship. And then in terms of being a mentor, I'm a mentor, but I also facilitate mentoring like Josie. So built by us, we've taken an approach which is all stages and all ages. And the key word there is transformation. The reason that we keep doing what we're doing, we've been doing mentoring for a number of years, is because we see the transformation, not only in the mentees, but in the mentors as well. People tell us how powerful it's been in terms of helping them to develop their interpersonal and leadership skills, communication skills, a lot of the things that aren't always covered by the sort of technical or yes, more kind of technical base and process-based curriculum that we go through as technicians and practitioners in this industry. That's why it's so important, incredibly powerful.
That's really interesting. Thank you, Danna. So Danna, there can be a view that mentorship only benefits the individual, but is there a broader business case for more formal mentoring programs to attract, retain and nurture talent?
Absolutely. And I'd like to build on the point about our curriculum. Studying about the built environment, about construction, about design is quite a different thing from delivering a project. There's so many more things that you need to understand. And I think for someone like me who had no one in their family that had a construction background, that meant I didn't really have the social network or social capital. There was no one I could really kind of go to ask those questions. So what we want to do within Built by Us is to support people in building that social capital, to find ways that they can learn, which they lead. So for me, mentoring is incredibly important because it's learner-led knowledge exchange, often between individuals, or it could be amongst the group. The business case, I would say, it's a number of things. So it's tried and tested. Mentor comes from the Greek, so it's at least 3,000 years old. You're not doing something wild or radical if you're undertaking mentoring. It's also helping you to future-proof your organisation as well. So fantastic things that Josie is doing and focusing in on the graduates. The research is suggesting that over 70% of millennials expect mentoring when they get into their new roles. The idea that we don't support people is not something that a lot of millennials will entertain in terms of their expectations of their jobs. So I think there's a lot there in terms of helping people to develop, future-proofing your business, and ensuring people are picking up the skills that they need to deliver on these incredibly exciting and complex projects.
Sounds like it's really important in terms of the recruitment of new staff as well, to know that they've got that path to follow, isn't it? So Josie, is that something that you really do with Steer as well, sort of taking people from education into the workplace, the business case there?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. We speak to a lot of built environment companies to support the Steer development programme, and one of the key aspects of what they would get by having a mentor with a built environment undergraduate student is that sort of recruitment selection activity that they could actually be going through. So the way that we set the programme up is they're usually matched around November time in the academic year, and that runs all the way through to May. So it's not really short term, it's the academic year that they're matched with this mentor. So as a business, you've got an opportunity then to really get to know them. We don't put any limits on the amount of times that they meet, but we do encourage meetings within office environments. So they're able to meet who they might be working with, and they get to see what an office environment or the contractor environment might look like. There's a real opportunity for businesses to promote their own businesses there, look at the fantastic work they're doing, because the student's going to go back and speak to colleagues. Oh, I know about this company because I went to their offices and it's just absolutely fantastic, so there's a real opportunity there for businesses. But it's also about that, if businesses are allowing or helping people be mentors, then there is that skills development that Danna's been speaking about, that personal skills, the leadership skills, and that's going to be incumbent in what's going to happen in that mentor relationship, and the mentors will get more confident from that as well. So there's three things that I would think that the Steer development programme would give to businesses.
Thank you. Ewelina, have you seen firms embrace the business case, or are there still issues that push firms away from fully adopting mentorship programs, do you think?
I think it's a bit of a mixture, and it relates to what Josie just said with regards to confidence. So organizational confidence on whether they understand what mentoring really is. There's this misconception of how onerous it is. So organizations tend to interpret as this huge program or HR engagement and people allocated and all this, work that needs to go into it equates to resources, which I think in people's minds are vastly inflated to what it in reality is. And it's the fact that no one often can sit down and actually articulate the benefits. We know what the benefits are, but articulating it in such way that the business can conceptualize it and digest it and take it forward is a bit tricky. So even when I sit in leadership meetings, we talk about mentoring, all of a sudden people veer into coaching, and then all of a sudden, we will need to then train people on how to do this, or we will need to educate the people who are to engage. It becomes a big thing. And I think that's the biggest obstacle. to when businesses are considering it. But there are some businesses who do take a step back and they do other things. They don't call it mentoring, but they call it buddying. So it's a first evolution. It's almost like the beginning of that competency, organizational competency. And I think that's okay. I think it's okay to not go full throttle ahead and take a step back. But yes, the biggest obstacle is the appreciation for the benefits, and it's the inflation of the resources and input that program may require.
That's really interesting. So the other reason why people do implement mentoring programs is to look at workforce diversity. Josie, in your experiencing, how does mentoring help that?
So in terms of what we do with Steer, what we ask is that our mentors come from the underrepresented groups in the industry. So we specifically seek out mentors who are, women who are from ethnic minorities, LGBTQ+, and we ask them to be mentors, because what we want them to do is we want them to be the role models to these students that are about to graduate, to say, look, here is someone who's had a really successful career in the built environment, and they want to tell you about maybe some of the challenges they faced, how they overcame them, how they might have had to steer their career slightly in a different direction to perhaps what they thought they were going to do. So if you take my career, my experience, for example, I was a site manager for 10 years and then I got married and started having a family, and there was no way I was going to be able to continue being a site manager. But I wasn't going to leave the built environment, and that was very important to me, what I had achieved so far. So I ended up then going into academia for 7 years and being a course director for civil engineering there. And for me, I'm still in the built environment. I'm still using a lot of transferable skills that I have gained throughout my career, but I'm just doing it in a slightly different way. And I think that's what I want these role models to show, is to show what their stories are, and to help people and the graduates see how they've done it. It might be the case that these graduates that come into our industry aren't line managed by a woman for any of their careers, because of the amount of, how male dominated it is. So that's really important for us to do it. So that's what we do as Steer. The other program that we've been supporting on is the Ground Forum Undergraduate Mentoring Program. And the way that we encourage diversity there is we match based on people's preferences. So you might have a woman saying, oh, actually, I want to be mentored by a woman, and the undergraduate mentoring program then will match based on that. So you can do it in the way that we're doing it with Steer, and just making sure we've got those mentors as role models from underrepresented groups, or you can do it more directly and try and match that way. But these are small, sort of positive actions that you can take to sort of drive that diversity through. And I think mentoring is there as a vehicle to do that.
That's great. Danna, I can see you nodding away there. Do you very much agree with Josie's view on mentorship to drive diversity?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's at the very kind of core of what we do, and it inspired and built by us to be founded in the first place. My own experiences, the things that were coming up through research, were saying that the attrition rates for people who are underrepresented in our industry were far higher than they should be. So the industry, over the course of many years, has on occasion said, we want more diversity, we want more women, we really want to see that diversity. However, what unintentionally has happened in many cases is it's created more of a revolving door. People come in and then they leave. They leave for lots of different reasons. It might be around changes in lifestyle, taking on caring responsibilities. It's also the image and sometimes the culture. So there are lots of different things that need to be addressed. I think one of the magical things about mentoring around diversity, and one of the things we encourage in the things that we do in terms of the programs, is really about meeting people where they are. So absolutely understanding and welcoming, that those underrepresented and disadvantaged people, And I think it's really important that it's broad and intersectional when we're talking about diversity. Fantastic that there is a focus on women, but it's also an intersectional question as well. So women of colour, disabled women, LGBTQ women, etc. And that need, that desire has really come from them. You know, how can we navigate such an exciting, fast-moving industry, but also not kind of lose ourselves within it, or have that industry take too much from us. And I think that's where mentoring, and particularly around diversity, makes such a kind of beautiful match, because it offers that kind of support, meeting you where you are, allowing you to kind of lead and guide and help you know, your mentor. Mentoring is a partnership, so it's not about one person kind of dragging you along to a particular place. It's about, in a more traditional one-to-one relationship, two people working together for the benefit of the mentee.
Great, thank you. And Ewelina, do you agree with Josie and Danna, or do you have a different view?
I completely agree, and also would probably summarize it as seeing is believing. So seeing others in action, seeing people who are like us, or not necessarily whether it comes to, you know, gender or other aspects, but even the diversity of mind. I often throughout my career found myself wanting to do things differently to my bosses, whether they were male or female, putting that aside. But as I was coming into the industry, I also had the opportunity to perhaps see things slightly differently. And without mentorship, I wouldn't have gained the voice to put these ideas forward. And therefore, I would have potentially robbed the industry of other approaches, or industry. Perhaps this is taking too much credit, but at least the project. Perhaps the project would have not benefited from a different take. And, you know, you never know, it may have finished later or exceeded the funding. So I 100% agree. 100% agree that we do need to be putting mentoring programs out there for diversity purposes, so people can see us doing what we're doing, can talk to us about what we're doing, why we're doing it, and also can take inspiration from it should they want to follow a similar path.
Okay, great. Don't forget you can add some questions in the Q&A panel to put to our panelists later on. So what advice would you give to firms to help them successfully implement a mentoring program to ensure everyone gets the maximum benefits from it? Danna, what are the key points that you think should be considered?
That's a great question. So for an in-house mentoring program, I think there are some things to consider right from the top, i.e., what is the program about? So sometimes a company will approach us and say, we want to do mentoring. You say, okay, what might success look like for you? And they're kind of going, mentoring? But actually there are so many different ways that you can kind of describe or really think through what success looks like and the sort of intended outcomes. Really interesting point around resources. So, you know, in terms of the style of mentoring that you choose to do, make sure that there are some resources. It can be, depending on the style of program, different styles have different levels of resource that are needed. So circle mentoring, i.e. working in groups of people, is a different level of resource than sort of traditional one-to-one where maybe you're matching the pairings. So yes, think about what it is that you want to achieve, and also just make sure you've got some resources available to make sure that your program runs smoothly. Those are the places that I'd start in terms of implementing the program.
Thank you. Josie, have you got any recommendations?
No, I think Danna's covered most things. I think that why question is incredibly important. Like, you know, people might say, oh, we'll just start doing mentoring, but unless they understand why they're doing it, you know, what is the, you know, what is the outcome? What do you want to happen at the end of it? You know, I think that's a really important question, because we've got a lot of people that might be going through professional qualifications, and there is a clear reason why they are being mentored sort of going through there. But why is really important. And just on the resources, in-house is obviously great, but there are going to be some external people that might help. So you might be able to bring in a mentoring company that can support, sort of do a bit of training, and make sure you've got that sort of structure in place going forward as well.
Great, thank you. Ewelina, have you got some advice to offer as well?
Again, as I said, something similar at the very beginning, making sure that it's scaled to the business, and don't always consider it as a big rollout, a big program. But the one thing for a successful mentoring, whatever it is, whether it's one-to-one or otherwise set up, people need to be given time to have that time with the mentee. What I found myself doing in the past, and I didn't think then that I was effective with my mentee, is it was a half-an-hour session on Teams in between back-to-back meetings on a day. I wasn't really paying attention. I wasn't really committed to that person. And all the basics are time, focus, concentration, and hearing the other person. Everything else around it you can shape up as you go along, and you can grow that capability.
So it's really interesting sort of talking about the issues you might have. So we've focused a lot so far on how to create the best environment for successful mentorship, but we all know even with the best intentions, things don't always work out as planned. So can you share with us some of the other common pitfalls that people may come across that could either affect the mentee or mentor and prevent them from actually realising the full benefits that they set out to achieve? Danna, what could we learn from mentoring relationships that haven't gone to plan?
There's so much to learn, but I think you can mitigate some of the issues by really thinking through, what it's like from the perspective of those pairings. So I think first things first, helping them or supporting them in terms of setting expectations. In our programs, we ask our mentoring pairings to talk about that right from the off. What's your preferred communication style? Have you got any plans over the next 6 or 12 months that could impact? Because that's going to be one of the things, as you're building rapport, as you're kind of gaining confidence in that relationship, if something suddenly changes or it's not meeting your expectations, that can be one of the first things that can derail the process. So incredibly important, I think, to establish, I wouldn't quite say rules, but expectations, I think is probably the best way to put it.
Ewelina, have you got any other common pitfalls that you've come across? You talked about the ones you've experienced.
Yes, and apologies if I'm breaking a little. I think my connection may be a little weak for a second. So the fundamental one was the time. The second one that I've come across is perhaps this need to ensure that we're on the same page between mentor and mentee. And I found it on a couple of occasions. And we have to appreciate, whether you're a mentor or mentee, that this is a mutually set up relationship, but neither party has to do things for the other. It comes from the want to help. It comes from the drive of wanting to see others succeed. But neither party doesn't own each other or anything. And the reason why I highlight this is because sometimes mentorship could be perhaps misconstrued or thought about as a way to enable people to get the connections they're looking for in a way of expanding their career. But it's really about the individual getting the support for them to embrace their position and for them to grow. The growing doesn't happen via the mentor. We have to grow within ourselves. And as a mentor, as a mentee, I take the feedback and input from my mentors. I actually have a board of directors, so I don't even have one mentor. I've got a couple. They've got different skill sets, and they come with different backgrounds, and they can give me their advice and talk about their experiences, but they will not do it for me. And I think that's quite important to put it out there for people who are looking for mentors. It's that appreciation. I've come across of that being an obstacle and perhaps a point of frustration at times.
Great, thank you. Josie, have you got any common pitfalls you want to share with us?
Just by the very nature of working with final year undergraduate students, is that creating that sense of security and being able to talk about what they want in front of someone. Ask those stupid questions. I mean, for you as the mentor, I think Ewelina talked about imposter syndrome right up at the start, but you might think, oh, I've got nothing to share, I'm not a very good mentor. But they're looking at you in a completely different way. They're thinking, goodness me, this person's got tons of experience. And I don't want to say the wrong thing. I don't want to come across looking really silly. So I think that initial conversation is incredibly important, and then keeping that conversation sort of going. And we've had challenges, haven't we, over the last year or two, because of the fact that we all started working from home. We've had a full year doing Zoom calls and MS Teams calls, and even like seeing yourself and then having to, you know, speak to someone that you don't know very well. Like the mentor probably has had to do a lot more work in just creating that really relaxed atmosphere, being able to get the most out of the mentee so that the relationship can be fruitful at the end of it. So I think that's really important. And the other thing I would just say to anyone who's being a mentee is don't think the mentor has all the answers, because they don't. And quite often they're not going to know the solution to your problem, but they should be a really good listener, and they should be somebody that can help you see what options there are, and be able to push you opportunities if there are coming up.
That leads me on quite well to the next question, which is, do you think some people are more naturally suited to being a mentor? Or do you think firms should be considering training for mentors to ensure everyone actually gains from the process? Josie, do you offer your mentors support as you bring them on board?
Yeah, so we absolutely offer a bit of training. We sort of run a session with them all before they do the mentoring. As the programme has gone on, we formed in 2016. What we can do now is bring people that have been mentors into those sessions to speak to the new mentors, so that they can say, oh, these are the sort of activities we carried out. And that's really lovely, you know, some sort of practical advice from somebody that's been through it. And we can also bring in people that say, you know, well, my mentee didn't actually turn up and it never happened. And there's a point where you've got to maybe just say, actually, you know, I'm going to stop contacting them now. And that's kind of where we can get involved as well. The other thing that we try and do is set up networking sessions, and that's really helpful in just sharing again what sort of things you've been doing, what sort of things the student was perhaps asking, and that's always a good way to give them more confidence. But you know, once you have been a mentor once, it's growing in confidence, and it's being sure that, you know, you're not trying to tell them the right answer. What you're trying to do is share your experiences, and offer them some support in terms of, you know, what they're thinking about and where they think they might be going as well.
Yes, and mentors themselves can have imposter syndrome as well as the mentee, definitely. So Ewelina, do you think mentoring is a natural talent or one that can be learned?
I want to believe it's natural, and I think we all have it. As far as we've got the ability to create relationships, that's what mentorship is. It's a relationship, an exchange of knowledge and exchange of experience. So I want to believe everyone's got it. Yes, there are some other considerations that come into that relationship, which we discussed, such as setting the boundaries or setting up the ideas and sort of putting your own platform together on how you will collaborate. But I really think we all have it in us to support each other. That's the beauty of human beings.
Lovely. Danna, do you have any advice for people who are looking to become mentors?
Oh, make inquiries, you know, get started, find out about, you know, some of the amazing programs out there that can offer you the support, can offer you training and information, so something more structured. Look for those opportunities within your own organizations and networks to be a mentor. Lots of people are looking for mentors, and not all of those people are at the sort of the beginnings of their careers. They might be making the transition into becoming a manager, maybe a junior manager for the first time, or even more advanced in their careers. And sort of building on that point about imposter syndrome and flaws, lots of mentors have great self-awareness, but they can, no matter what they've done in their career, kind of go, you know, they sidle up to me and say, I'm not sure if I've got enough to be a mentor. But I love that kind of mentor. I love the kind of person who is incredibly self-aware, but also passionate about supporting another person. Whether or not it is completely natural or not, I think the key thing to communicate to mentors is what mentoring actually is. Because there are some people who think it's I'm giving advice or I'm telling somebody what to do. Think more Karate Kid, perhaps, you know, the kind of wash on, wash off, you're not quite sure always what the mentor isn't necessarily giving you the direct information, but they're kind of giving you a clue. They're giving you something in terms of guidance. They may be basically more encouraging you and helping you to explore your options. I think mentors can last, you know, any period of time from, you know, quite a short period of time to a lifetime. And I loved what was said earlier about I've got a board of directors. You know, you can have more than one mentor working with you as well. So I think mentors, it's really important for them. If this is something that you've been thinking about, if this is why you're here, start to explore those opportunities, because there will be something that fits you in terms of time you have available, in terms of the style of mentoring that you want to engage in.
Brilliant, thank you. I can see quite a few questions coming in from our audience now, so let's take some of those. Lem, can you put the first one to our panelists, please?
Thanks, Claire. Yes, I've been keeping an eye on these. One of the questions kind of picks up on what's just been talked about. Someone's asking, do you have any tips about how to be a really good mentor? I think, Danna, you covered this off a little bit. So Ewelina, would you have any tips for what should I be doing if I want to be a great mentor, and what sets me apart from a not so great mentor?
I would definitely say it's a lot about listening. It's a lot about listening, and it's also finding a language that you use for your mentee as well, considering that when we come from slightly different technical backgrounds, there's probably a little bit of understanding of what actually is being said or what the challenges may be, and committing to giving the time. So if you say, I will spend, or if you agree with your mentee, we'll spend an hour every fortnight just talking about the experiences you're having and maybe thinking about questions you want to ask. Really dedicate yourself to that time. That, as I've mentioned before, I've had a mentee whom I felt I haven't done justice because I have been running around, because I have been, you know, in the back of my mind, I was thinking about my next problem I have to fix in my day job, rather than actually truly listening. And they probably didn't get the depth of answers from me that they could have otherwise. But we rectified that later. We did. But yes, give it the time, concentrate, switch everything else off, and have a true conversation in depth about the challenges the mentee may be having.
Thanks, Ewelina. No one's perfect. And Josie, I was going to maybe switch the question around. I think Danna earlier said that the mentoring relationships should be mentee-led. From the more junior side of things, Josie, what's your perspective about how can the person who's being mentored make sure that they get what they need out of that relationship? What makes a good mentee, as it were?
Yeah, so I absolutely agree. It should be mentee led, and we do make that point in the program that we run. We do a lot of work at the start of the program, and we ask the student and the mentor to meet each other face to face. We can do it face to face now, and we give them some information to use for that meeting. And what we do is we get them to set development objectives for the year above, year ahead. And we do SWOT analysis, so strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. So we kind of use it as a framework to guide that initial conversation, because it will just, instead of, you know, sitting down in front of especially a student and going, well, what do you want out of this? They'll probably be like, I don't even know where to start. So by giving them some sort of structured document to go through, that's going to allow them to then start thinking about what they want to actually get out of it. And it might be, you know, more than likely, I'd like to get a graduate position, you know, at the end of this year. So that's really important, that initial conversation. We then ask them also to set some meetings with one another. You know, choose a date for your next meeting, agree how you're gonna meet. And then we make sure that we do check-in calls round about sort of February, so if they're matched to November, sort of, you know, a few months down the line. And that's for us just to check that that relationship is still going, because all of the mentors that we have, and I'm sure everybody else's experience, you know, it's free time. It's like you're volunteering your time to speak to these people. You're not getting paid for it. And the last thing we want to do is waste anybody's time. So if we find that they're not having those conversations, then we follow it up and we find out the reason why, and we try and reconnect them where we can. But it has to be mentee led, and we do say to the mentors, we don't expect you to chase them. That's where we can support and get involved and make sure something hasn't happened. But it is up to the mentees at the start. And again, what Danna was saying, like, if you've got exam periods coming up, tell them that you're not going to be available to speak for a month because you're going to be doing coursework. And at least they then know, and they're not trying to get hold of you, you know. Thanks,
Josie. I'm going to move on to another question. There's a couple of related questions here. Danna, maybe you can pick up on these. The first question is, where do I go and look for a mentoring program? Are there any websites which would gather these things together and help me find one? And I'm going to link that also, if you're in a small company, or maybe the mentorship scheme within your company is not what you're looking for, do these cross organizational boundaries? When they cross organizational boundaries, do they work any better? Do they work worse? What do you think, Danna, on those two topics?
I'm going to tackle the second question first.
Sure.
Crossing organizational boundaries, crossing discipline boundaries works wonderfully. This is something that is very much in the way that we run the programs, particularly Fluid, which is our longest running career development program. So with Fluid, anyone can apply at any stage of their careers, and a whole range of disciplines, from architecture to project management to all of the different sort of elements of construction. What we found is a great benefit is that often in our disciplines, we can work in kind of silos, or when we're studying, we're kind of in silos. So having that kind of cross-discipline conversation is absolutely fantastic. And people learn a lot from each other, because although we're all working in one sector, we have such a different view of that sector. It's a very different view being a site engineer to being an architect, to being a project manager, etc., etc. And then in terms of mentoring programs, different places. So absolutely, Steer, Built by Us, we have a number. Do go to builtbyus.org.uk to have a look at the programs we run. One of the things that has been so exciting to see is that actually there's been a bit of a revolution happening. More and more mentoring programs are coming to the fore. So things like Women in BIM, for example, actually lots of grassroots networks and associations are now incorporating mentoring into what they do. You may, if you're part of a professional body or an association, have something available to you through that. And I'd certainly look for not just the things that support you in terms of your studying, but things that go beyond. So with the kinds of programs that we do, if you're working towards chartership, for example, and we have something for you. But if it's actually about your personal development, or the things that you want to achieve, your sort of aspirations, we do that too. So that there is plenty out there.
Well, thanks very much for that. Ewelina, I can see you've answered in the chat that there are programs there organised by the Association for Project Management. I mean, would you share what Danna said, Ewelina, about the value of looking for people outside your own organisation in terms of those mentoring relationships?
Oh, it's immense. Even from the perspective that you have a complete freedom of what you're saying. It is wonderful to have mentors within the organization, and yes, it gives you an opportunity to be exposed to other issues outside of your immediate team. It can help you elevate your thinking and become more present within the wider organization. But at times there may be things that you would consider approaching or not, because it's within your own organization. Externally, you can talk about any issues you want, given that's within the parameters of your relationship with your mentor, and feel completely free about what you're seeking advice on. And let's face it, we spend 5 days a week at work. We can get overwhelmed with the people around us in our organizations. And perhaps sometimes we even need advice on how to deal with conflict internally, or how to deal with putting something on an agenda that people don't want to hear. These external mentors can definitely support and give you a pathway or an idea of how to do it in the most appropriate way and in the most effective way. And again, that's what I'm going to highlight. I think I've got 5 mentors, but I have to tell you, not all of them know that they're my mentors, just to put it out there, because we have this professional relationship where we talk, and I can just pick up the phone and say, oh, I have this issue. Have you ever done this? And I sort of select who I go to, but I can't say that with all of them. I sat down and agreed, okay, you're my mentor now. We're committed to each other for God knows how long. It just evolved. And some of them are actually even people who I approached. So mentee led, again, very important. And some of them, they never met me. We met online because I liked their information. I liked what they were putting out there. So they were my indirect mentor first. And then somehow I engaged with them and they became my direct mentors without being named a mentor. So just if I could give one piece of advice to everyone, don't be afraid. Seek out outside of your own business that you work in, and just talk to people. Can I just say the most important person, my new mentor, and he doesn't know he's my mentor, is Antonio Nieto Rodriguez, who's the biggest project management, how to put this, promoter out there. And I just on an off chance messaged him on LinkedIn and he replied. And then we talked and we're talking and it's amazing. So yes, reach out to people outside of your own business.
Well, if he's watching this, he knows now. So Josie, maybe you can help with this question. We talked a little bit about how mentoring can help diversity earlier on in this. There's a question here about the topic of disability, and obviously that's perhaps a particular challenge in some of the activities that go on in construction and in engineering. You've got to get on site. I'm not too sure how many sites are wheelchair friendly, for example. Just to pick on one kind of disability. Josie, how do you think mentoring can help in those circumstances where people have different abilities?
Again, I do think that it's that providing that role model, you know, providing or showcasing the fact that you know, having a disability, you still have lots of opportunities to work in the built environment. I expect there will be challenges as well, but speaking to someone that has been through those challenges is going to make more and more people think that that's okay, and they can sort of overcome them as well. I know that on the Ground Forum mentoring program that we do have some mentors that do have disabilities, and they're really great in being able to promote, you know, how they work and how their employer supports them working, and it's just conversations like that. It's the more people that can say, you know, this is how I have built a career for myself in the built environment, and I've done it with all the other things that are going on as well. I think that's hugely valuable, that role model activity.
Thanks, Josie. Danna, do you have a view on how mentoring might help in this situation of helping disabled people come into this industry?
I think it's been tremendously helpful. We've certainly, through the years that we've been running our mentoring programs, and they are open to a huge variety, diversity of people. So we've witnessed it, and it's profound, and it's kind of humbling to see as well. So being able to match somebody, again, we ask people about, you know, what their ideal mentor would be, and sometimes people really want that lived experience in their mentor. They want someone who understands the sort of entirety of that experience, because it's not just about achieving the work. It can also be about how people view you, the kinds of things people say, the language, the behavior. So having someone that can help you to navigate that, having someone that has a very similar communication style to you. So sometimes it can be around communication, learning styles, as well as mobility, hearing, etc. So being able to match people who may have had very similar lived experiences is incredibly powerful and profound. And the changes that we see in those people, because there's a saying, you know, you need to sort of see it to be it. When they've seen someone who's navigated very similar challenges, it lifts that spirit. It changes the worldview and kind of reframes the situation for them. So we're very proud to have been able to support people in that.
Thanks, Anna. Just for those people who are watching, there's a few tips in the chat for places to go to look for mentoring relationships. Danna, just coming back to you, you mentioned about circle mentoring. I wondered if you could say just a word or two more about that. Not everybody's going to be familiar with that concept.
Yeah, so the traditional form of mentoring is sort of one-to-one, but also you can be working in a group situation. So often we'll find circle mentoring used where people are at a sort of similar developmental stage, and working together perhaps with one mentor and a group of mentees. So that can be a really effective way, but particularly in in-house programs, to get as many people within larger organizations, for example, or even smaller organizations who in terms of resources may not be as sort of resource heavy or resource rich, to provide mentoring to as many people as possible. It also gives the opportunity for a certain amount of sort of peer-to-peer mentoring, so the people within the group are listening, learning from each other, and also they may have different sort of approaches and perspectives on any issues or challenges that others are facing. So it's, again, it's a very powerful tool.
Well, thank you very much, Danna. I'm conscious that we're coming up to, we've actually hit midday, the time that we're due to end. I'm conscious everybody has packed diaries and we'll be moving on, I'm sure, to other things. All that remains for me is to thank all of our panelists today for sharing their expertise. It's been a fascinating session. Thanks, Claire, for hosting the first half of this session. And thanks to our sponsors, Curtains and Wilmot Dixon as well. Before we go, I just want to remind everyone that we are running a survey to help us shape the programme going forward. So please do take a few moments to fill that in. And obviously, later in the year, we're going to be running some awards as well. We're looking forward to some entries into that. So do put your thinking caps on about what categories you might enter when that programme starts. It would be great to see more women put forward as role models to inspire others through that process. But from all of us here, thanks for watching. Thanks for your questions. Hope this has been helpful. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.